to Help Wanted. On this very special series, we bring guests to talk about how their personal lives impact their work lives and how that all ultimately comes back to benefit the recruiting, talent acquisition, and employer brand industry. Now, we've covered vast topics from dirt biking to mental well being to queer allyship. And today we're talking about something pretty intense. So, a report recently came out from resumebuilder.com that stated 1 in 4 hiring managers are less likely to move forward with Jewish applicants. This is an astounding stat that's only reinforced by saying that an alarming amount of anti Semitism within companies, a great deal of which is considered acceptable. So speaking on this subject is daunting for a number of reasons. It's sensitive in nature. It is not I am not a professional on this subject, and we may make mistakes today. And if we mention something in the wrong way, please DM us to let us know, and we will work to better ourselves in the future. Understand that mistakes are often made in the journey to learning, and that's exactly what Help Wanted is for. We need to be able to make mistakes, the process of learning to get to a better place. And one person that I think can really, really help with that is named Eli Landes, and he is a remarkable communicator, which is why the Career Arc blog is such a powerful resource for recruiting professionals. He also happens to be a rabbi with an extensive knowledge of Jewish history, the impact of anti Semitism, and how recruiters can provide balance and support in their DEI practices. So I want to welcome Eli to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank you for speaking with us, and also mention that Eli, you are coming to us from you work what office are you in today?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I also I direct a preschool, so I'm in our preschool office, which is why you might hear some children in the background.
Which is actually really cute. So I want to thank you for speaking with us today. It's a big ask, and you came through. But to start off, I really want to have you tell us about this article and your thoughts on it when you first read it. And as a pro in the industry, I just can't imagine what it's like for you to read these statistics.
Yeah, I mean, anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred in the world. It's bigger and older than any ideology, any ethnicity, any culture. Throughout history, Jews have been blamed for everything. And it's always been a highly illogical hate. And I think when you look at that survey, besides for that glaring number that 1 in 4 hiring managers wouldn't move forward with a Jewish applicant, when you look at the reasons they gave, it's Jews have too much power and control. Jews claim to be the chosen people. Jews have too much wealth. Jews are greedy. Jews killed Jesus. And then at the very end of the list, Jews are less capable. So you have to go through this whole list to see anything as anything related to work,
Which
which is, I
is
think,
literally comical when you think about all the things that they're saying, like Jews have done this negative thing and this negative thing and this negative thing, but then it says that they're incapable. I was like, well, it seems like they accomplished a lot if you want to believe all the other stuff. Like,
yeah,
you
you
know?
can't have your cake and eat it.
Yeah, no, you cannot. Um, so anti-Semitism does appear to be on the rise. We see it in the news in a lot of different places, and in politics in a lot of different places. That it hasn't been as prominent. It's more prominent recently than it has been in some ways in recent years. But I don't know. Tell me about your perspective on that too.
So I think, like you said, it's definitely becoming more commonplace. It's like I said, it's an old hatred. Growing up in England,
Mhm.
I'd get calls of "Hey Jew" from passersby every day. I didn't think anything of it until I came to America and realized, hey, that's not normal. But I think what we're seeing today is anti-Semitism becoming commonplace in all levels of society, especially in what should be considered safe places, in workplaces, in campuses,
Mhm.
in politics, by business leaders, by celebrities, by influencers, by in entertainment, in the shows that are being produced. I think that anti-Semitism today can be found in exactly those places that have long been hailed as the shining lights of modern life. Um, and I think what's of particular concern is the degree to which it's getting excused. It's getting explained away
Mhm.
that it's not anti-Semitism, and it gets a new label. They'll call it, anti-Zionism or something else. And I think it gives the ability to get away with anti-Semitism because you're not going to call it anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And I think many Jews are hurt and even angry. I think throughout history, Jews have fought for the civil liberties and the rights of those who, were, even when they weren't afforded it themselves, they fought for these rights. And they're looking now at people who have been fighting for other people's voices and just seeing silence and wondering, hey, what about us?
Yeah, and I think anybody can relate to. I know we're talking about a really large issue right now, but if you take it on a much more personal level, I think it's easier for people who maybe aren't Jewish or aren't from a marginalized group to understand. So if you can apply it to, your own experiences, and you think, when I hear other people talking bad, like me, for instance, I'm a part of the LGBTQ plus community, and when I hear negative things about the queer community, I get personally offended. And when people don't support the things that are hurtful to me, it says something about that. So how can, we are speaking about this as a whole, but also in reference to the recruiting industry. So how can recruiting professionals make better practices around such complex issues on issues like this?
So I want to start off by saying that for recruiting professionals, I really get it that it can be very frustrating because I think many recruiters perhaps did not get into their space to suddenly become advocates and activists for DEI and for the various type of discrimination you see out there. That's not what they got into it, and suddenly they're being asked to do it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think right now, especially in America, but around the world, there are certain areas of DEI that are getting more attention and it's less popular, I guess, to discriminate against certain groups than other groups which get ignored a lot, like anti-Semitism. I think anti-Asian hate is an example of a group that's just not getting the attention it should.
Yeah.
And so I think that in certain areas it's easier to skate by um, without getting noticed. That I don't have to tackle this group because perhaps no one's asking me to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at the same time, when it comes to DEI, when you start speaking up for one area and then you stay silent on another, it speaks. That silence, that inaction, it speaks to those people who are watching and saying, "Hey, I saw you say something. I saw you fight for something for one marginalized group, and now it comes to this marginalized group, and you're not saying anything."
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, that gets noticed. So I think if there are people out there I know who are just experts at DEI and know how to be there for everyone and speak for everyone and fight for everyone. I think honestly, most recruiting professionals probably wouldn't consider themselves that.
Yeah.
So I think if you feel like you don't know how to speak for the Jews in your company or to speak for other marginalized groups in your company, the best thing to do is ask.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the silence speaks when you make a post about Juneteenth, and then when it comes to Rosh Hashanah or Holocaust Memorial Day, and you're silent, that gets noticed.
Yeah.
So I would say just ask and ask your Jewish employees, how do you feel represented? What would it and if you don't feel represented, what would it take? What would representation look like to you? What would inclusivity look like for you? Instead of assuming, because when you
Yeah.
don't know and when you assume, you tend to walk away with the wrong idea.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I want to point out, that a lot of what Help Wanted is about is, we use the phrase help wanted to say, hey, we need help at our company. We want you to come join us. Like, you could be great for this position that we have open. But the other thing is that as recruiting professionals, we need help to understand how to be the best that we can be. We need help to understand how we can, emphasize employer brand appropriately, or make sure that our job posts indicate that this is a safe space for a diverse group of talent. And from a Jewish perspective, how does one combat anti-Semitism in the workplace, or just in general?
It's an interesting question because, like I said at the beginning, it's the oldest hatred in the world, and if it is
Mm-hmm.
the oldest hatred in the world, you kind of assume, well, what can I do about it already to fight something that's been so old? And when you look at Jewish texts about this, surprisingly, Judaism doesn't have as much to say about anti-Semitism as you might think. We have what to say. Judaism has something to say about everything.
Yeah.
But for a hatred that's been around as long as we've been around, you would think there'd be more. I think that's a point. we are not defined as a people at the other end of anti-Semitism. We are
Mhm.
more than just a people united against anti-Semitism. We're bigger than that.
Yeah.
I think there's a common misconception that the Jewish people are not doing enough to fight against anti-Semitism, and respectfully, I disagree. I think the number way we fight against hate and anti-Semitism is with Jewish pride, by not being afraid, by standing proud and strong in the face of those who tell us to hide, that we don't belong here, that if we want to survive, we need to give up everything that makes us who we are and assimilate.
Mm.
You know, I found once a book called That Bogeyman the Jew. I think it was written in the early 1900s. And the title caught my attention, so I decided to read it. And the book made the argument that, you know, America had opened its arms to the Jewish community, who were fleeing horrible persecution and hate, especially from Eastern Europe. And if
Yeah.
Jews wanted to survive and get and stop being persecuted, they needed to assimilate. They needed to let go of whatever made them who they are, and just become, you know, indistinguishable from any other American. And I think the way we fight against that, that's, I think, the argument that anti-Semitism makes, that if you want to survive, you don't belong here looking the way you do, acting the way you do. You've got to stop being who you are. And I
Mhm.
think when we stand proud in the face of that hate and say no, that's how we fight back. I think every Jewish girl lighting a Shabbat candle, every Jewish male proudly wearing, you know, a yarmulke, a head covering, every Jew unabashedly, unashamedly praying in an airport is making a loud statement that Hitler
Yeah.
failed, that anti-Semitism is failing, and that nothing can staunch out who we are. As an aside, I remember one of my first weeks here at Career, I was in a meeting and I was on Zoom, and I realized, you know, you can only see like this half of my face. And I had my yarmulke, my head covering in such a way you couldn't see it. It wasn't possible to tell technically if I was Jewish or not. So I moved it, even though it was unnecessary. We weren't having a meeting about anything Jewish, but because I'm a proud Jew, and in everything I do, I want to represent myself as a proud Jew. And if it felt like I wasn't doing that, I wanted to correct that. Um, and I think it's very apropos that we're talking about this right before Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the history, but over 2,000 years ago, the Jewish people were under the oppressive reign of the Syrian Greeks, who decreed that any Jew caught practicing Judaism would be put to death. So a small band of Jews fought back, and miraculously, although they were untrained, and there was only a few hundred of them, and they were fighting against tens of thousands of trained soldiers with war elephants, they won. But that there's more to the story than that. That's actually not the celebration of Hanukkah. The reason we
Mhm.
celebrate is because of what came next. The Jewish people entered the Jewish temple that had been desecrated by the Syrian Greeks, and they wanted to light the menorah. And there wasn't enough oil to keep on lighting. They only found one jug of oil, and it would take 8 days for more oil to be bought. And they didn't have 8 days worth of oil. They had one day's worth
Mhm.
of oil. But nevertheless, they lit that menorah anyway with that one day's worth of oil. And miraculously, it burned for 8 days and nights until new oil could be delivered. Now, that seems a little strange that we would focus on a miracle that seems to have really to do with supply and demand,
Yeah.
of a miracle of the Jewish people fighting and overthrowing oppression. But I
Mhm.
think that's a point. The eternal message of Hanukkah isn't about the military victory. It's about the triumph of light over dark, about how we walked into a vast, dark world with only a tiny little bit of light left. And we
Wow.
weren't afraid. We said, if all we have is a small jug of oil, then that's what we'll light. And when we stand proud and unafraid, I think we discover that our small light isn't really that small, that we have the power to light up the night.
Yeah. Um, that's such a beautiful story and a powerful story. And there's so many layers to it that I know everybody listening can find one aspect of their life where they felt suppressed. They felt like they had to behave in a certain way, and they felt like they were, not able to be their authentic selves or care about things in the right way. It was a natural inclination for them as well. So I really appreciate not only you sharing this story, but sharing it in a way that is understandable to so many people. To the number of people who are non-Jewish on this call who are going to understand this better now because of that, and more, and reinforcing that for members of the Jewish community who are on this call. So I do want to. I know that we're getting a little bit close to time, so I want to wrap up with any final thoughts that we might have to be able to wrap this up on a light note. And I think that you have another cool story to share with us.
So I guess as final thoughts, about a year ago, my cousin was murdered in a terrorist attack in Israel. And afterwards, instead of fighting hate with more hate, my uncle, my aunt, my cousins called for people around the world to increase in acts of goodness and kindness in his memory. And I think that is the way Jews have always responded to anti-Semitism. And
Wow.
that is, I think, the eternal message of Hanukkah, that no matter how dark the night is, our light, and no matter how dark it might seem to be, our light is stronger. So, Brian, I really want to thank you for facilitating this important conversation. And like you said, for those listening, I hope it sparks many future conversations around these topics for you.
This is really just the beginning of this conversation between the two of us and with the rest of our company. And I agree. I hope the same for everybody else. And thank you for coming on again, for sharing this to us. This has been such a fantastic and eye-opening conversation. Eli, you have fought the darkness of this data from the resumebuilder.com story with such positive light. We can use our continued education, empathy, and compassion and understanding to bring more kindness, thoughtfulness, and efficiency to the world. And recruiting professionals are really in one of the best places possible to make this happen. You are the ones who welcome people to a company. You get to see, this person is a great person for so many reasons beyond just what they do in their job. So thank you to everybody who's helped out today, including resumebuilder.com for the article. Marissa, our behind the scenes queen, is helping direct us, and Eli for the beautiful way you shared such important information. So last thing I want to say before we depart, this is likely the last episode of Help Wanted Season 1. But don't worry, we are already set up with some amazing guests from outside of Career Arc planned for Season 2 with more powerful information for our industry. I hope you'll come back and stay tuned for that. We're looking to have that start up at the end of January. So a little break for the holiday and the new year. Eli, thank you again for everything. To all of our guests so far and all of our viewers so far, thank you as well. And we'll see you back again soon. Have a good one.
Thank you.